When an economy gets really sick, businesses closing down, people losing their jobs left and right, what do? Well, today we're going to open up the economy's first aid kit and take a look at one of the most powerful and honestly controversial ideas ever, Keynesian economics. It's a question that affects every single one of us. We've all seen it, right? These periods of amazing growth and then, bam, a painful crash. But why? What actually causes a perfectly healthy economy to just, spiral downwards? To really get a feel for the scale of this problem, I want to start with just a number. No context yet. Just look at it. 15.4 million. Let that sink in. That's what it was, the number of Americans out of a job at the height of the Great Recession. It's a staggering figure, and it really shows you the human cost of these downturns. So it begs the question, right? What causes this, and is there a cure? Okay, so to answer that, we've got to go back in time, to the Great Depression of the 1930s. And that's where this guy, British economist John Maynard Keynes, steps onto the scene with a completely radical new diagnosis for what was wrong. See, for the longest time, the classic economic idea was basically, if you build it, they will come. The belief was that if factories just produce stuff, people will automatically have the money and desire to buy it. But Keynes looked around at all these empty factories and unemployed workers and said, no, that is clearly not what's happening. He argued the problem wasn't a lack of stuff to sell, it was a catastrophic lack of people buying. And this all boils down to one absolutely central concept: aggregate demand. It's a fancy term, but it's just the total amount of spending in the entire economy. For Keynes, this was everything. This was the engine that drove the whole system. And if that engine starts to sputter, the whole car, the whole economy just stalls out. So this economic engine has four main parts, kind of like cylinders. The biggest one by far is consumption. That's you and me buying groceries, cars, movie tickets, you name it. Then there's investment. That's businesses spending money on new factories and equipment. Third, you've got government spending on things like roads and schools. And finally, net exports. Basically, what we sell to other countries minus what we buy from them. If any one of these cylinders starts to misfire, the whole engine loses power. Okay, but this leads to a really important question. If demand falls, shouldn't prices and wages just drop to match it? Everything just finds a new, lower level and we get back to normal. Why does the economy get so stuck? So Keynes's entire theory really stands on two main pillars. We've already talked about the first one. Sometimes that engine of demand just isn't running fast enough to give everyone a job. But the second idea is the real kicker, the reason recessions can last so long. Prices and wages are, as he put it, sticky. So what on earth does sticky mean? Well, think about a thermostat in your house. In a perfect world, when the economy gets cold because demand falls, prices and wages should automatically go down to heat things back up. But Keynes said, in the real world, that thermostat gets jammed. Prices and wages get stuck at a high level, and they don't adjust, leaving the whole economy shivering in the cold. And this chart just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you have the theory. Prices are flexible. Demand drops, so prices and wages fall, and that encourages people to start buying and hiring again. Simple. But then there's reality. Demand drops, but prices and wages stay stubbornly high. And what's the result? Warehouses full of unsold stuff and, sadly, millions of people out of work. So why are prices so sticky? Well, one really simple reason is something economists call menu costs. And it's not literally just about restaurants. Imagine a huge department store having to reprice thousands of items every week. It's a ton of work. It costs time and money, and it can really confuse and annoy your customers. So a lot of the time, businesses just decide to wait it out instead of cutting prices right away. Okay, so if the diagnosis is a lack of demand and the economy can't fix itself because of sticky prices, what's the cure? This brings us to the most famous and definitely the most controversial part of Keynesian theory, the prescription. Here's the core of it. Keynes argued that when the private sector, that's all of us and all the businesses, gets scared and stops spending, there's only one player in the game big enough to fill that void: the government. It needs to step in and give the stalled engine a jumpstart. And this is where the idea gets incredibly powerful. It's a concept called the expenditure multiplier. The big insight here is that when the government spends $1, it doesn't just add $1 to the economy. It creates this ripple effect that actually adds more than a dollar to the economy. It's a huge deal.
Let me walk you through how this works. It's actually pretty intuitive. So the government spends, say, $100 to hire a worker to fix a road. What does that worker do? They don't just stuff it under their mattress. They go out and spend it, maybe on groceries. Well, now the grocer has an extra $100 of income, and she uses some of it to go get a haircut. And the barber now has more money, and on it goes. That initial $100 gets spent over and over again, multiplying its impact.
So this whole idea gives the government a pretty straightforward toolkit with two main settings. When the economy is in a recession because demand is too low, it can use expansionary policy. It can increase its own spending, or it can cut our taxes, leaving more money in our pockets to spend. On the flip side, if the economy is running too hot and causing inflation, it can use contractionary policy, cut spending, or raise taxes to cool things down.
So what's the end game here? What is the goal of all this government intervention? Well, it all leads to this really elegant, simple idea. The whole point is to create a Goldilocks economy. The government's job is to constantly tweak that big engine of aggregate demand to keep things just right. Not so hot that you get crazy inflation, but not so cold that you freeze up in a recession.
Now, of course, this all sounds great in theory, but it's way harder to do in the real world, and critics raise some really valid points. Like, can the government really know what that just right level is? And we all know politics can be incredibly slow. Can politicians act fast enough to actually make a difference? And is just spending more money always the answer? These are the tough debates that are still going on today. And that really brings us to the final crucial point. Keynes gave us this incredible new way to look at the economy, and a really bold plan for what to do when things go wrong. But the debate he sparked is far from over. It forces all of us to ask a fundamental question. What is the just right role for the government in our economy? The answer to that question, well, it shapes everything.